Let's tell you about climate activists. Kumi, Naidoo and Malik Dasoo were forcibly removed from Standard Bank headquarters yesterday. The two activists were protesting against the bank's decision to fund the East African crude oil pipeline. The over 1,400-kilometer pipeline is expected to run through Uganda and Tanzania. We are now joined by climate activist Kumi Naidoo. Kumi, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Perhaps let's start with an understanding of the environmental, social and corporate governance framework in South Africa, what is termed the ESG.
Yeah, so we have, environmental and social guidelines that companies need to actually follow. But the reality is that there is a complete denial about how close to the climate cliff we are, even though already we are seeing significant climate impacts in South Africa and the African continent at large. So last year, when in those 2 days, 450 people lost their lives in Durban, what the local people call a rain bomb, that is one of increasing, intensifying signs that the climate challenge is real. So the protest yesterday was really about trying to get Standard Bank shareholders to recognize two things. One is what they're doing is harmful to society in the sense that it's contributing to emissions, but already we look at the two pipelines in question, the East Africa crude oil pipeline and the Cabo Delgado gas projects in Mozambique, and we look at what they are funding in KwaZulu-Natal, where Standard Bank's investments have led to the lives of climate activists being lost and so on. We can see that all of these projects have already brought, like the one in Tanzania, Uganda, already 100,000 people at risk of, and some have already been displaced. We've seen human rights abuses in Mozambique, as we know, and so on. So what we are saying is that we recognize that we cannot get off oil, coal, and gas tomorrow, that we have to wean ourselves off it. But what we're saying is criminal now that we know what the science is telling us, right, that we are so close to the cliff and we're already being hit by impacts, that new, fresh investments should absolutely not go into what the science says is destroying our children's future. So that's what that protest was about.
Sure. So you've done several human rights and environmental impact assessments. Have you shared them with the bank, I guess, in trying to understand what would have led you to a point where you go and you protest and now you have to be taken away by security?
There's been, firstly, this was organized by young people who sought out somebody with more gray hair, and my better half who is on the joint me as well. And we went to support the young people because young people in our country get it. Our generation are engaged in a level of denialism that goes against the science, goes against their own children's interests. When I say own children's interests, I'm saying much as the managements of these banks or the Ministry of Energy Affairs here in South Africa can shout and scream at us and use repression sometimes and so on. The reality is facts are on our side, science is on our side, and there's been dialogue. By the way, the group involved has been in about 2 to 3 years dialogue with the bank. There have been other activities and so on. And basically what Standard Bank is not saying to us they disagree that climate change is real and it threatens all our children's futures and that the impacts are already here with us. They don't disagree with that. What they are saying is that we need a transition, and that transition has to be that we continue investing in fossil fuels even though we have alternatives in renewables. So all we are saying is let's make the transition happen right now. Let's not delay it any further, because the more we delay, we have two risks. One, the climate risk, but secondly, the economic risk. The economic risk is twofold. For Standard Bank and other banks that put big amounts of money into carbon investments, they're going to end up with stranded carbon assets, which will be worth nothing. The other risk is by not moving now aggressively in the direction of the renewable energy technologies and new technologies that bring energy a different way and in a renewable way, we are putting ourselves at the economic disadvantage. So the longer we drag our feet, the countries and the companies that will do better in the current and the future will be those that get as far ahead of the renewable energy technology as possible.
In the risk assessments that you have done, I mean, when we talk about 1,400-kilometer stretch, what did it reveal? Will people be removed from their places of residence in terms of some of the deposits that are found on the earth? Of what impact will this also be?
Okay, so the East African crude oil pipeline has already resulted in forced displacements and land grabbing, displacing local communities from their homes and displacing them of their livelihoods. 100,000 people across Uganda and Tanzania will in the end ultimately be affected. Now, Standard Bank would say, we are preparing, we're going to deliver jobs, right? And it's not as if no jobs will be delivered. But when you dig deeper, a lot of the jobs are transient jobs, short-term jobs, and actually for a lot of the sort of high-end jobs, they'll bring those skills from outside, so the local community doesn't actually, benefit. If you take the Cabo Delgado gas projects, has already led to human rights abuses, local communities being displaced, and so on. So the facts are there, and I think investors far too often and banks far too often choose to close their eyes to the negative impacts on the investment, provided they are getting a return on their investment for their shareholders. And we are saying we need to bring in the decision-making of banks, a much higher level of economic and social considerations in their decision-making, which this two projects in particular, the coal project in KZN, also does not respect.
Climate activist Kumi, thank you very much for your time this afternoon.